this year. I'd like to invite each and every one of you to join us for the upcoming television series Spirit of Civitan TV. It's going to be on URTV, and we're going to be covering some of the important issues affecting our community. We're going to be meeting some of the civic leaders who are making a difference every day in the lives of our community, and making things better for our children and grandchildren, making this a better place in which to live. So we hope you will be able to join us and watch our series as it comes forward. Thank you.
Well, today I want to begin that recently Nathan Ramsey of the Campagin County Commissioners made a motion to put on the November ballot a referendum for district voting. It failed for lack of a second. Several months ago, Brownie Newman proposed an election reform commission that also failed. Before that, partisan voting was defeated by the Asheville voters. The time for voting reform needs to be now. Support a public commission to discuss and inform the public and politicians of the advantages. Here are some of the major issues to be considered. Tom Colson will speak from Care Partners, who works at Care Partners. He's not representing Care Partners. He will speak to us on campaign financing. Well, he'll shoot me. Anyway. An update on what's been happening at the state level. Rebecca Manning will speak to us about instant runoff voting. She's a self-employed lighting designer. Elaine Light, who has spoken to us in the last year, will speak to us on filling vacancies, something that she has been, that needs to be clearly defined by the City Council. And Jay Quinn, who's been here before as well, will speak to us on district voting, and recently mentioned by the county commissioners. So we'll begin right now with Tom Colson.
Number one, some months ago, it was proposed the City Council appoint a commission to study the various election reform issues that have been pushed in recent years. That proposal was placed on the council agenda at the last minute without notice to the people advocating the council, and no one being present at the meeting to defend it. It was voted down. Now, of course, if the councilman who had presented it was really enthusiastic about having such a commission formed, I guess you could bet that people would have been informed and would have been there. Perhaps you'll recall some years ago, back in the early 90s, there was another commission that was formed in Asheville. It was headed up by Mary Bolton. And it came about because of concern about the amount of money being spent on municipal elections. We've been concerned about that for a long time, haven't we? They met a number of times. They made a proposal. They proposed that we have an option for public funding for campaigns for the municipal elections. City Council ignored their findings. These experiences can be blamed on city officials for dodging issues that are before them. But I think the reform community has to share that blame. If we want the city to change, we want them to enact new, different ordinances that will change the way we operate our government. We need to do several things. We need to get with the councilmen and earn their trust to get to the point where we can have a discussion with them, be taken seriously. And more important, we need to get the public behind this so that they're hearing from their constituents and demanding it. We didn't do a good enough job in either of those cases, and we failed. he who has the money wins the race. In all of the Asheville City Council races since 2001, the candidate who spent the most money was elected. The candidate who spent the least money was not. Winning candidates in 2007 raised on average nearly double that the 2005 winners raised. And nationwide, 85% of contested races are won by the candidate spending the most money. Now, it's easy to demonize politicians by saying that their votes are purchased, but of course that happens sometimes. More often, however, contributors give money to candidates who reflect their views. Unfortunately, though, in North Carolina, 90% of all money contributed to political campaigns comes from just 1% of the public. The rest of us, the underserved 99%, with our $50, $100, $200 contributions, are barely having our views seen at all. The system also discourages potentially great candidates in our community from running in the first place. And certainly, it disproportionately affects the possibilities for minorities and for women. Now, if you feel that the cost of being elected shouldn't discourage good prospects running for office, if you would like to see those governing us be able to reflect the society in which they live with regard to race, gender, and dare I say it, class, if you'd like to assure that having lots of money or the access to the money of others isn't the first primary in the election, then you should look at the successful statewide programs in Maine, Arizona, and Connecticut that provide funding on a voluntary basis for candidates who show support by raising a stipulated number of small contributions, who agree to raise no more money, and agree also to adhere to strict spending limits, and then are given sufficient public funds to run a competitive campaign. Any city wishing to enact such legislation will need a legislative delegation to submit a bill allowing that city to design and implement a public funding option. Chapel Hill and Cary have such legislation, and are now designing their own public funding options. Asheville should do no less. And now I've got some good news and some bad news. By doing the things that I spoke of earlier, by cultivating legislators, by gaining their trust, by being able to talk to them on an even plane, by getting the public in back of us, in recent years, we've made some real gains in the state of North Carolina. We passed a public funding program for judges in the North Carolina Appellate Supreme Court. This is a model for other states which are setting up similar programs. And let me tell you what it did. It made the races nonpartisan. So you can't vote for judges on a straight ticket. You have to pick the man or the woman. It provides a voluntary public funding mechanism for their campaigns. And one of the most important things it does is it provides that every registered voter in the state receive a voter's guide with biographical information on every candidate for those positions. We've also passed significant lobby reform, ethics legislation, municipal funding measures listed that I've mentioned above, and a pilot program of voluntary public funding for the insurance commissioner, the superintendent of public instruction, and the state auditor. And now for the bad news. Recent appointments to the United States Supreme Court have created a majority that's hostile to campaign reform. The judicial bill, which was challenged in court, recently strongly affirmed by the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, but it will now go to the Supreme Court. We can anticipate constant effort in the courts to maintain the status quo. But we don't have to maintain the status quo here. We can move ahead and improve the capacity of our community to have one person, one vote. And I urge you to do so. Thank you.
Good afternoon. If North Carolinians wanted a voice in determining the Democratic nominee for Labor Commissioner this past election cycle, they needed to return to the polls again on June 24th for the runoff election, and unfortunately, most of us did not. The irony is that many working people do not return to the polls for runoffs, and for this particular vote, it is their voice that should be most heard in determining the winner. Meanwhile, officials in counties across the state have had to focus to shuttle funds to cover nearly $5 million needed to administer the election. On May 6th, 1,200,407 voted for their preferred candidate. In the runoff election, less than 3%, actually 1.87% of the registered voters in North Carolina voted in that runoff. That broke down to approximately $57 per vote that the taxpayers paid. Approximately 90% of the cost was borne by counties, which are already struggling to make ends meet. But this information is not new, even though less than 3% of North Carolina voters went to the polls. The good news is that there is a better way. It's called instant runoff voting. In 2007, North Carolina conducted overwhelmingly successful pilots of this simple but effective voting method. The pilot elections for town council seats in Cary and Hendersonville prove that we're ready to take the next step toward broader practical applications of instant runoff voting. Instant runoff voting is a simple way to elect majority winners in one round of voting. In races where 3 or more candidates are running, you mark your first choice as usual. You also have the option to indicate a second and a third choice. Voting for a second choice can never hurt your first choice. Your second choice is looked at only if no one receives a majority of first choice votes, and if your first choice is not one of the top 2 vote getters who advance to the, quote, instant runoff. The benefits of this process are clear. Money is saved, voters save time, the results accommodate the preferences of all voters. The spoiler effect that now allows a third or fourth party candidate to unfortunately negatively impact the vote totals of candidates with similar but stronger support is avoided. And the second round of campaign money chase is eliminated. It helps to eliminate negative campaigning because someone's second choice may be another voter's first choice, so candidates are less likely to bash their opponents. Instant runoff voting ensures majority winners in one higher turnout round of voting, allowing us to get on with the business of government. As municipalities across America and countries around the world have proved, instant runoff voting, 1, does not require new or elaborate technology. It can be accommodated using standard paper ballots and optical scan machines. The same system is now in place in most North Carolina counties. All that is required is a straightforward software update, as being done in several other states. And the software update in North Carolina would be $1.1 million estimated, whereas we spent $5 million on the last runoff election. Voting integrity can be assured in the same way we now manage regular elections through random security audits. It's easy to understand either by new or infrequent voters. Exit polls conducted in Cary and Hendersonville showed that over 70% preferred it to separate runoffs. It does not require elaborate retraining of Board of Election staffs. Simple training on how to instruct voters can be conducted during regular pre-election training with minimal effort. And again, with the $5 million we spent on the last runoff election, we could upgrade our software and implement a pretty effective voter training program. IRV is used effectively by people of all races and educational backgrounds. Since those who typically vote in runoffs tend to be wider, more affluent voters, instant runoff elections help promote more equal vote. We live in difficult times. Revenues are shrinking, expenses are increasing, and we do not know when or if things will get better. We need practical solutions and as many challenges as we can. Instant runoff voting is a proven system. We have the building blocks to put it in place, and it would take relatively little initial output of funds to enact. If you would like to encourage North Carolina to move toward instant runoff voting, you can contact our local city council members here. Fortunately, our local legislators, our state legislators, approved the extension of the pilot program for another 3 years. So we have the opportunity in the next 2 election cycles to implement instant runoff voting at the city and the county level. And I have a lot of contact information to get you involved, to help you understand the issue if you're not already familiar with it, and to help you contact those people. The commission that we are seeking to get reinstated or get instated for the first time or the second time would be a place for this kind of grassroots information to get out to the voters. We can't rely on voting systems that worked when there were only a few 100,000 of us. Now that there are a few million of us, we just need to upgrade and improve and get the math out of our way so that we can get a full representation of the diversity of our desires and needs. I have lots of information and I can give you brochures, but let me just give you the quick rundown of how instant runoff voting works. You have a ballot, and for a single seat, for a single seat election, for one winner, you would rank your candidates 1, 2, and 3. The votes are counted, and if there's a majority, there is a winner. If there is no clear-cut majority, then the candidate with the fewest votes is eliminated, and your second choice your first choice vote is eliminated, and your second choice gets allocated to the next person on the ballot, to your next choice. And that's the elimination round that happens in one action, in one election, rather than it happening in 2. So the numbers have to be worked into the software, which is why it requires a bit of software upgrade. Other than that, it's a very straightforward method. It's often used. You may already be using it in boards of elections, school boards. There are many local groups that are still have been using this to run off for many, many years. I'll be glad to answer any questions when this is over, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Citizens in Western North Carolina gain access to public officials and administrative processes. I also work with the Democratic Party. I'm a precinct chair on the State Executive Committee, and I am deeply committed to our city, our county, our state running the best elections that we can. Citizens want to feel confident in the structured process that we use to select our local government officials. And so it does make sense to review from time to time the electoral procedures that we do use. And I want to thank the Civitan Club for sponsoring this forum. As we've heard, there was an attempt this past winter to launch a Citizens Commission on election issues, and it didn't get anywhere. My issue is reason the other commission died in Asheville City Council, and that is, if you're an incumbent, why should you have any problems with the status quo? You used the structures we have in place to get there. You succeeded given the current structures. So why should you be interested in changing anything? And that's something that we've all got to understand. Generally speaking, people who participate as candidates in the electoral process who end up being very, very interested in electoral reform are the candidates who don't win. So let's bear that in mind and understand that those who are in office today are going to need a good deal of pressure in order to change the methodology that they might have to rely on to get reelected. So I think they're going to come at this very, very cautiously. Anyway, you know the status quo in Wilkin County, you know the status quo in Asheville City, and that is all voters vote for all candidates. We have elections at large. That is, our representatives represent the entire jurisdiction, the entire city, the entire county. And so, of course, each of those at-large candidates is voted upon by all voters. Now, there are alternatives. And I believe Mr. Ramsey's alternative at County Commission was to separate the county into distinct districts and then have the voters in each of those districts elect a representative. And you could form a commission that way. And that's one way to do it. But there's another way to do it by district. And that is have representatives from each district, north, south, east, west, however you want to do it. But have all voters vote for all of the districts. There have been a lot of citations that we don't have the best geographic diversity in our county commission or on our city council. In fact, Chris Pelley, who really wanted to be here today but couldn't because he's taking his daughter to college, Chris was nice enough to send me a little analysis that he had put together where he looked at the composition of Asheville City Council from 1997 through 2005, and then I had the most recent council. And he makes note of the fact that of the 32, it was about 40 seats, 42 seats actually, 16 of those representatives have come from zip code 28804, 12 from 28801, 9 from 28806, 4 from 28803, and only 1 from 28805. The idea is we do not have the breadth of geographic representation that we might on Asheville City Council. And so the question is, do we have the most effective representation? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. But I'll bet a Citizens Commission would love to tackle something like that and see what might make sense for Asheville. Now, as we look at these issues, the big things to consider are access to the electoral process. How easy is it for a candidate to challenge incumbents, and perhaps win a race? That's one issue. Another issue is constituency. Who's being represented? Is it a neighborhood? Is it a district? Is it the whole city, the whole county? And expense. We've heard about expense a little earlier. Believe me, I was Elaine's treasurer last fall for city council. Money is a huge, huge obstacle. It has to be overcome for a lot of candidates, and so it's very daunting. I think that we need to look at all of these issues together, have a lot of smart people sit around the table and hash things out. But think about this. In terms of access by candidates, understand that vote thresholds, the number of votes you need to win, and money thresholds, the amount of money you need to wage a viable campaign, are much, much lower in races where the voters in a ward or in a district are only voting for one representative in that district. It's much, much easier. The narrower the geographic area of your race, the easier it is to wage a campaign. Face-to-face meetings are easier, canvassing efforts are easier, and costs are much lower because the number one cost, the most effective way to reach the voters is through direct mail. And if you can narrow geographic scope of your campaign, you have just controlled direct mail costs tremendously. The least